You're listening to the Future Sense podcast. You can find us online at futuresense.it.
So I'm curious to get into something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I really wanted to bring this up to you to kind of see what you think of it. And I don't know how much of this stuff you'll be aware of or how well I'll be able to articulate this kind of question, but I have been pretty aware and exploring a lot of different information surrounding some of the inconsistencies and manipulative aspects of this whole COVID-19 scenario. And I know you've spoke a little bit about, it seems that there's like an economic reset kind of happening. And I've been diving into a lot of information about the Great Reset, these ideas about, people putting out these books and documents about these plans that are certain, technological things and changes that people want to make to the way we live in various different ways, to the economy, to the energy systems, to the food system, to biometric IDs and all of these things. And there's certainly, I think for a lot of people, a certain paranoia about global, like a deep state and a global domination and a new world order and all of these things. And understandably so, it can be a scary thing. And but I also recognize, like for me personally, I feel like when I get a bird's eye view on these sort of things, I feel like ultimately it's all sort of a part of the tension that pushes us to evolve, to these next layers of sort of coping capacity. But what I'm thinking about is, for one, how much of this stuff you kind of entertain or get into or research just to kind of be informed as to what's going on. I know like Victoria in Australia has had some pretty intense lockdown measures and different things that seem to be way out of proportion for what's going on as far as the death tolls or anything from COVID-19. And I've been sort of racking my brain as far as, some of these plans and things that seem to be laid out as far as certain groups that want to sort of take control of certain things and have plans. I guess what I'm kind of struggling with is, where do you see some of these a thing like the Great Reset or the Build Back Better or the Agenda 2030, the UN stuff. What layer of consciousness are these things coming from?
They're a combination of layers. And the reason I don't talk about this stuff much is because many, many years ago, when I was consulting as a change management consultant in the corporate sector, I had a big sort of flash of light happen, and I got this message saying, stop trying to fix the old things. They're broke and they're going to break more. Actually shift your attention to supporting what's new, and what's growing and what's coming next. And so that's why I don't spend a lot of time talking about these structures that are desperately trying to hang on to power and, doing the most outrageous things to try and make that happen, but inevitably destined to fail in the process. And when it comes to organizations and groups, it's true that you'll always find a mixture of value systems in these groups because people join them for different reasons, and people perceive and are attracted to them for reasons associated with their own value system, So a good example is the United Nations just put out a video recently, I think it was in September, which is their latest agenda video. And it's a real mixed bag in terms of values. I mean, it's full of a lot of very appropriate and important information about the damage that we're doing to the earth and how we need to change our behavior. But that's interspersed with absolutely authoritarian statements like, this must change, you must support us, and all this kind of stuff, So it's a real mixed bag in terms of value systems, and there's clearly a lot of layer 4 authoritarian stuff coming through there, which is obviously reflecting people who are inside the organization, and shaping it from that particular value system. There's a lot of really good stuff that's coming from more complex value systems as well. That's very appropriate. And you've got to appreciate that when you look at all of these different pushes, particularly the globalist stuff, is understand that, okay, these organizations are going to have a mixture of people in them. Those people are going to come from a mixture of different value systems, and they're going to be shaping, the overall organization in terms of their ability to influence it from those different value systems. What's true is that as a species, we're moving from an era of individuality to an era of community, and that means that it's very likely that we're going to want to try and have cohesion and collaboration at a global level. Okay, so that's a fundamental driver of humanity right now, is to want that. And depending on which value system that you are dominated by, you're going to try and achieve that in different ways. If you were coming from layer 3, then you might take to the streets with a machete and change it by violence. If you're coming from layer 4, then you'd be looking for an authoritarian solution where you or the organization you belong to can have absolute, strict, rigid control over what everybody on the planet does. If you were coming from layer 5, then you'd probably be looking to do it in a way that's going to make you a lot of money and make you very successful. And maybe, like, for example, coming out with a vaccine that's going to make you billions and billions of dollars, and not actually appreciating the human impact in the process. And layer 6, would be looking to do it by making friends with everybody and talking a lot about peace and a lot about what needs to be rebalanced on the planet. And you can see all of that when you look around at the moment. What is going to be most effective in solving the problems that we face as a species on this planet right now is for that globalist push to be shaped by the most complex layer of consciousness that we're capable of rolling out. And right now, when you look around the world, you can see evidence of, the most complex value system that we're capable of rolling out right now, which can dominate the world in some way, has been layer 5. And layer 5's done that through the threat of nuclear war and by, selectively invading countries for strategic advantage and killing a bunch of people. Layer 6 is, of course, pushing all that away and saying, we don't want these wars anymore. We really have to collaborate. And what we're seeing come through at the moment is a lot of regressive messages through as people slip from, entering layer 6, they're slipping backwards to layer 4, and the authoritarian kind of stuff comes out, and you'll get statements like, we really need to stop cutting down the trees, and we really need to stop polluting the atmosphere, and if you don't do it right now, it's going to be big trouble, so do what you're told. So you get a real mixed message like that. And then you've got, from the what's left over from the scientific industrial era, you've got a whole lot of people with a whole lot of money who have become very influential because of that, who come from a mixture of different value systems again, although predominantly layer 5, because often that's what's allowed them to be successful. And they're looking to profit from what's going on at the moment. They're looking to profit from the problems that the world has, and they're also playing out their own fears. I mean, you've got to remember too that in all of the first tier layers, so 1 through 6, fear is a big driver as well. And it's only when we go into second tier that fear drops away. So, you've got very rich people who are very afraid of overpopulation, because it's going to get in the way of their life and what they want to do to be successful. And, fear of different political systems like communism or socialism and those sorts of things. So it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's very complex. You've got to appreciate that there are multiple value systems involved here, not just one value system. You've got to appreciate that one of the fundamental drivers for our whole species is to get together at a global level and kind of try and make things work. And everybody's going to be coming at that from the angle of their dominant value system, which means that you're going to get, pure power plays. You're going to get authoritarian attempts to do it. You're going to get profit-making attempts to do it. And we're seeing all that being rolled out at the moment. One of my old spiral dynamics teachers, Don Beck, who was one of the authors of the book, he used to say that during this time towards the end of the first tier, we're going to see every character from history come back and walk the streets, and that was his way of saying that all these value systems are going to flare up at the last minute because they're all trying to kind of save their egos and existence, I guess. Yeah. So it's a very interesting time. One thing's for sure, though, is that if you spend too much time focusing on these issues, you're kind of missing the point. The point is to actually look ahead, to look at what's emerging as new evidence of more complex and more peaceful and more capable ways of living as human beings on this planet. They're the things to focus on right now. And if you go down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, you're going to waste a whole lot of your time and probably miss the boat, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, I've definitely found certain value in informing myself about some of the behind the scenes things of what's going on and various, the way sort of the world works or has worked up until this point in certain ways. But for me, it is a little bit like I recognize that it's almost like a junk food habit or something.
Yeah.
Like there are plenty of times where I am focused on things that are exciting to me and seem like the future, like regenerative agriculture or various different things.
Yeah.
But then there's this sneaking kind of craving for this junk food of like, oh, what's going on with this drama?
Totally,
and I felt like it probably has something to do with, my own part of my own healing. I definitely feel like that's part of the reason why I can still be attracted to to sort of trying to look into the darkness is just probably some of my own shadow work that needs to be done.
I think you're absolutely right there. And you can use those things as tools for your own developmental process, by noticing, okay, what is it that I'm actually getting drawn to at the moment? And what is it about me that's resonating with that, and then go inside and look inside and say, okay, there's actually part of me that's a little authoritarian, or there's part of me that's a bit power hungry, that I need to give some attention and do some healing around. Yeah. So yeah, everything can be useful in its own way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how you described, how you see all that stuff, because that's part of the thing that I think I brought me to that question is, when I would take in some of this information about, let's say, like a globalist agenda type thing, I would see language in it that did seem like, okay, yeah, I see there is something here that does seem like it could potentially be a good intention or something.
Yeah.
But then mixed into it, there's some weird forms of like complete control and surveillance and domination. And it's sort of like I've recognized in myself, like during my time of transition from one layer to another, that my mind wants to have complete control and domination through that process because it feels so disconnected from any sort of structure or path that it wants to just somehow lock down and have a complete control. But ultimately it can't because it's an uncontrollable territory. It's this territory of transition where there is no structure.
Yeah.
And so that, I guess, is one way I sort of related it on like a microcosm, macrocosm sort of level.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one of the things that is most difficult for many people at the moment is the attempts by organizations and people who are dominated by layer 5, scientific, industrial, kind of personal success thinking and behavior, because it can be so exploitative, every value system is amazing and useful in the right context. So I don't mean this as a criticism of layer 5, but I just want to point out that layer 5 will do whatever it takes in order to reach its goals. And it's generally the communal value systems that create the moral structures that we live by. So the stability of the communal value systems brings us these, moral guidelines. And then when we bust out into the individual value systems, usually we're escaping the limitations of those structures, and we want to escape them. We want to do our own thing. So with the individual oriented value systems, they're usually wanting to break the rules, break the moral codes and see what they can do on their own. What if I do it my way? What if I find my own truths? That's just a fundamental aspect of the individual oriented value systems. And so layer 5 has been very much like that. And right to its death, layer 5 will be trying to profit from whatever's going on around it, so even when it sees all of the structures that it's sort of built its life around falling apart, it'll still be going, okay, the world's falling apart because of this pandemic, and the economy is going to hell, but maybe if I come up with a vaccine that can make me a lot of money, I can get really rich and powerful in the process. And so that's exactly what we're seeing, and most people probably will be familiar with the concept of whitewashing or greenwashing, as it's often called these days, is dressing something up to look like something else in order to benefit from it. And so we know that layer 5 is very, very good at that. It's very, very good at making something look like one thing, but then on the inside it's different, and this is where the whole idea of the corporate image came from. It's to look good on the outside, and then it doesn't so much matter what's going on the inside of the corporation. And so we should expect anyone who's being driven by layer 5 at the moment to be trying to dress up what they're doing in such a way that it will appeal to most people. And if most people are all of a sudden starting to think differently about the planet and about nature and about themselves, then maybe we should make it look like that, because then we'll get their money as well. And this is why you're seeing things with these strange mixed messages, and maybe the message actually sounds really good, but you just get this feeling that something's not right about what the organization's doing, and that's quite possibly what's going on.
So another area that's intriguing to me that I think you have done a fair bit of research into is the climate change area, and it seems like, is there something similar going on there where there's the climate change, like the strong desire to fix the climate change thing seems to be a very strong layer 6 motivation, am I right? But is there a sort of a shadow aspect of 4 that comes into it, where it's like, we need to get off fossil fuels right now, and we need to do the green energy, and we need to do it our way.
Yeah.
And it doesn't care I don't care what you think about it.
With
and also even the sort of almost religious aspect of not being able to question the mainstream narrative around it and really have a complete discussion about the cycles of the solar minimum and maximums and all of these other aspects that play into it.
Yeah, it's a big story, and one that I've been thinking about doing another episode or two on in the near future. It's funny you should talk about strong desires, because the guy who actually was the first head of the United Nations Environment Program, his name was Maurice Strong. And when you start to look at the history of how all that unfolded and the whole global warming movement, and the people behind it, it starts to show up these differences in value systems and the mixed bag of value systems, with one message being put out, but then you look at the behavior of the people behind the message and it doesn't fit with what they're saying. And certainly Maurice Strong was an example of that. Just very quickly, so he was the first head of the UNEP, as I said, and led the first big conference that they had, I think, in South America, around the global warming issue and pollution and stuff. And he'd made his money out of cattle farming and fossil fuel based activities, and was still doing that at the time. Okay, so straight away from a values perspective, you've got to say, okay, that doesn't seem right. This guy's leading this organization that's supposedly pushing for a different world, but he's made his money and continues to make his money through all the things that he's saying have to change, right? And he was saying that the industrialized countries have to be disempowered. And he's even on record in a video, which is still on YouTube, saying that people should have licenses before they're allowed to breed. So that they give you some insights into who he was as a person. He got caught out taking $1 million bribe in the Middle East during the food for oil deals that were going on with Iraq years back. And as a result of being caught out taking that check, he fled. He left his job at the UN and he fled to China and lived out the rest of his life in China. He's passed away now, but he had very strong connections, I understand, to the Chinese Communist Party, and clearly he had some pretty serious personal moral issues, which led him to leave the job and flee, so that he didn't get prosecuted for taking bribes when he was working for the United Nations. So that's just one very, very small example, which tells me that, okay, this is probably not exactly as it looks when, this whole whole process. And then as I've researched the climate issue more and more, and with my understanding of how disciplines change as we move through these ages dominated by different value systems, I can see that throughout the scientific industrial era, all of our scientific disciplines went very, very deep in very, very narrow areas of knowledge. And of course, that deepened our knowledge in a whole bunch of different areas. But what was lost in the process was an understanding of how these areas of knowledge are connected with each other. And so we've ended up with a climate science which is rigidly linked to what goes on planet Earth and knows absolutely nothing about any climate influences, which seem to be coming from off the planet, except for the radiation of the sun. And so our sort of mainstream climate science has completely missed the key drivers of our climate on the planet, which are interstellar radiation and the behaviour of our local sun. And that has put us into a very tricky situation, because sometime within the next 10 years, this is going to come out, and people are going to realise that they've been sold an incorrect story, and whether that was an intentional thing, and quite possibly it was by some people, or whether it was just a factor of the evolution of value systems and our understanding changing in a natural way. And I'd suggest it's a combination of both of those things. Mm-hmm. What it's going to do in, probably I'd say with some time between now and 2032, in fact, probably before then, probably between now and about 2028, there's going to be a sudden mass realization that the science was wrong, and this story that we've been sold about, the global warming trend and all the science which is in and the science that completes, so you don't need to look at it anymore, and there's no argument, so stop arguing. People are going to realize that, that actually was wrong, and now we're moving into a period of cold, a mini ice age, as part of the grand solar minimum that's going on. And I've spoken about this in detail before on past Future Sense podcasts, and I'll do some more in the future. And that's one example of a whole bunch of things on the planet at the moment which aren't what they seem. And it comes back to, in many respects, the nature of Layer 5 and its capacity to bend the rules, break the moral codes, and do whatever it takes in order to achieve a goal. Okay? And then justify all of those things it's done by saying, well, look at the outcome. The outcome justified the means. And you can apply this to any industry you want to look at, whether it be war fighting or the pharmaceutical industry or whatever. We've seen this same behavior over and over again, whereby the original focus of a system, which was, to serve humanity in some way, has been bent around so that it's now built around an intent of success for an individual or a small number of individuals. And so we've been left with a whole bunch of systems, including our climate advisory system, our pharmaceutical system, you name it, our government systems, which no longer actually do what they were originally designed to do. Our pharmaceutical system doesn't do what it was originally designed to do. It just makes people richer, and it actually keeps people sick by not curing them, but just keeping them well enough to keep buying the pills. And this
that's another.
That's another story. But what I'm trying to say is that underpinning all of those stories is this one theme of exploitation, and it's nothing is good or bad unless you actually filter it through one of the value systems, and what's good or bad looks different to each value system. So for the people that have been doing this, it's been fine. It's been quite acceptable to their coding, and it's been part of the human journey from the first emergence of humanity and life as hunter-gatherers to where we are today and on into the future. We've had to traverse that terrain, and with any aspect of the situation you want to look at, you'll find that there are good points as well as what seem to be bad points, around them also. So it just comes back to human nature, So there's good reasons why you and many other people aren't feeling quite right about the COVID situation. They're not feeling quite right about climate change. They're not feeling quite right about government systems and elections for good reasons. And this is why our values are changing right now, because these things were useful for a time. They reach their peak, and then once they roll off the peak, they start to actually do more damage than good. And we're right at the end of that cycle for the scientific industrial era, where it's doing so much damage now that people are saying this has got to change. And that's what's driving the evolution of our values.
Are you familiar with Dr. Zach Bush?
I am, actually. I hadn't taken a lot of notice of him until just within the last week, actually. And a friend of mine, one of my old spirodynamics teachers, Christopher Cook from the UK, turned me on to him and said, just take a look at this video. So I went and watched this video, and there's some evidence of second-tier intelligence there. So, yeah, I'm very excited about Zach Bush right now, yeah.
Yeah, me too. I've been sort of obsessed with him since, the summer here. I stumbled upon one of his interviews, I think in June, and ever since I've just been listening to every interview with him I can find. And it really seems like, there is this paradigm shift coming in how we even understand, viruses as a form of and germ theory versus terrain theory, and the idea of illnesses and infections and all of these things, and viruses as maybe a form of genetic upgrade.
Yeah, very interesting.
And an environmental signaling, sort of a messaging system versus some sort of straight up pathogenic infectious thing.
It's an absolute shift of worldview. He's speaking very, very solidly from layer 6. I can see, and he's very agile, so he'll shift around and talk from a scientific perspective as well. And it looks to me also that he's poking into second tier at times, and talking from layer 7. It's always hard to know these things unless you really sort of meet and get to have a decent conversation with a person. But that's how it looks to me. That he's probably at least in transition from 6 to 7, and I think he's got a massive amount of useful information to pass on, and some really, really useful different perspectives for people to take notice of. And one of them, as you just said, is this idea that the virus is bad, you've got to kill it, that we're being sold at the moment. Well, in fact, it's not even alive, so you can't kill it. But if we look at human history, then some of the most useful things that have ever happened to our species have come through that DNA transfer via a virus. And Zach Bush, as I'm sure you've heard, has been telling the story of things like the evolution of placentas, which allowed mammals to come into being, came from a virus which transferred some genetic material and made that possible. And there are many, many other examples that he gives in his videos. I highly recommend his work at the moment. He's done a great presentation called The Virome, which I've been looking at recently. Really, really useful information. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff, and it's and it's exciting, but as exciting as it is, it's also it's one of those things where you wonder how long is it going to take before this is accepted or common knowledge or integrated into these systems.
Yeah.
Because it can be so hard to encounter all these situations, whether it's about masks or vaccines or fear around illnesses and death, and have some sort of graceful approach, like having a certain perspective that's so far separated from the mainstream paradigm, and how to sort of like embody that and communicate it while not totally rejecting people for what they still believe. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
I do, absolutely. Yeah,
convoluted.
It's always a challenge during these times of transition between value systems on the planet. And if we look back to the agricultural transition to the scientific industrial, people were jailed and sort of burnt at the stake for saying certain things that came from the new worldview because they didn't fit the old worldview. And I guess the modern equivalent of that is things like Julian Assange being imprisoned without any due legal process. People getting chucked off YouTube and banned from various internet sites and those sorts of things. So these are the sort of modern day equivalents of that, and it makes it difficult when you're a pathfinder of change. And it's a real balancing act to be speaking publicly, providing useful information about different perspectives and new ways of doing things, and not actually being branded as a heretic and silenced by the old systems. So I think Zach Bush is doing a really good job at that at the moment. And for everybody who's listening, probably most, if not all, of the listeners to this kind of thing are change makers in the world. It really does pay to think about that balance and getting the balance right. And that is also one reason why I don't go down these conspiracy theory holes too much in my podcast. I mean, apart from the fact that it really just spreads fear anyway, which is not useful. You also, run the risk of being shut down, and all the good things that you have to say, people miss out on those as well.
Mm-hmm. So, in terms of what you just said, I mean, throughout history, there is evidence that there have been extreme measures taken against sort of these, people that are coming out with information or displaying traits of the next paradigm. And there obviously is various efforts to silence things and surveil people and potentially mandate certain things or whatever. So, and obviously these transitions between value systems are very chaotic, and there is a lot of disruption. And so obviously nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. But when you contemplate this transitionary period, I mean, what types of things is it reasonable to prepare for? Where is that line between being fearful and just simply trying to look at things for what they are and consider actual potential outcomes and consequences, as far as whether it's authoritarian measures or censorship and surveillance or various different things, or just simply natural disasters or the electric grid going down? Where's the line between like conspiracy theorist and prepper and just sort of common sense? Like, how bad can we imagine that things might get, I guess?
Yeah. Really good question. I guess my first response to that would be to find your path. Everybody has a path that is laid down for them to some extent, in terms, and you might even say by their own choice before incarnating on this planet. And by tuning in to what's right for us individually, we'll be taken to the places we need to be, and we'll be brought the information we need to have in order to fulfill, the things that we've come here to fulfill. And I think that first and foremost is really the best kind of compass or direction finding advice that I can give. If you start to become fearful and think, do I need to buy a generator or a semi-automatic rifle and this kind of stuff, then you go down that rabbit hole of fear, and you completely lose your connection to your true self and your true path. And that's really the worst thing you can do, to end up like living in a bunker somewhere and wasting your life on this beautiful planet. So I think first and foremost, be in the world, be where you feel to be, and do what you feel is right for you first and foremost. In terms of how bad things can get and how to approach that, I think the way these sorts of major transitions usually pan out is you get small pockets of the future appearing. And that's, one of the things I say about the Future Sense podcast is the future's already here. That famous quote from William Gibson, I think, was the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. So if you look around and you know what to look for, you'll find the future. You'll find future ways of living. You'll find future ways of relating to other human beings. And they're all out there right now. So in the process of finding your own path, seek out the people that you resonate with, and you'll find pockets. I mean, I'm living in Byron Shire in northern New South Wales in Australia, where this whole shire really is a pocket of people who decades ago realized that there were different ways to live, and they came here to try and practice that. And so now we've got a reasonably sustainable pocket of largely layer 6 kind of folks, and a good a sprinkling of second tier who are living very differently than most people live on the planet, and doing it quite successfully. There are local organic food growers, and there are markets where you can go buy that stuff without the sort of huge structures of middlemen and in the supply chains and those sorts of things. And when I look at what I know about what's probably coming over the next 2 decades, I think the best thing you can do is to find your people and get as sustainable as you can be. Sometime, if I had to put a time frame on it, I'd say that probably, what is it now, 2020, I think within the next 6 to 8 years, you ought to look at finding where you need to be, finding folks that you resonate with, and diving into your own personal path and doing whatever it is that you feel you're here to do, whether you're a healer or a dentist or whatever. Do your thing and do it well, and do it surrounded by people that you resonate with in a place that you feel like you belong. I have seen predictions from sources I regard as reliable of the implications of the coming climate change, which at this stage is still giving us spikes between hot and cold conditions, but eventually will settle down. And certainly some astrophysicists that I trust are saying by 2028 it's going to be really, really clear that, okay, we're entering into a cooling phase here. If we look back to previous cooling phases like the Maunder minimum and those sorts of things, not the whole planet went freezing cold all at once. There were some places that actually got hot during those periods and stayed warmer. But overall, the Northern Hemisphere in particular was fairly heavily cooled, and at some point the Thames froze over for a while and that kind of thing. And that's going to interrupt food production, because a lot of the places where we're growing our food at the moment are in climates that are working okay, but those climates are changing. So we've already got some food shortages on the planet. That's going to get worse. And the best thing we can do is to find a community where we can become locally sustainable as much as possible. And that means, food growing and energy production in particular, I think. And communities will grow naturally, and you'll get a mix of people attracted to a community who bring all the different skills like health and well-being, medical, and those sorts of things that a community needs. So a lot of that stuff just happens naturally. But I think the big things that we should be looking at are localized energy production, and also food supplies that have fairly short supply chains, where that ideally is grown locally, organically, or it doesn't have to travel too far. Because once the climate change does start getting more severe, then it's going to be more difficult to grow food. At times it will be more difficult to travel, and the disruption to large concentrations of people who are still living very much according to the old value systems, I think they're going to be significant. So you don't want to be in a place where people haven't been preparing, they haven't been understanding what's going on, and they're getting caught out.
Right, and you're dependent on them for certain food items.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever. And I think COVID's been a wonderful little introduction to that. All of a sudden, you go to the supermarket and what you want isn't there. We're not used to that. How did that happen?
Yeah.
And it's all the early signs have come with the COVID disruption. If you look at what's happened and you start to think about, okay, what if that happened, but it was 10 times as bad? How would we be? What would we need to do? And in the process of all of that, I don't want to kind of encourage a prepper mentality in the classic sense of that word. What I want to encourage is how do we make ourselves more reliable and sustainable at a personal level, so that we can then help others. And of course, even through simple things like broadcasting information on podcasts, you're helping people all around the world. Because of the spread of people who are like that conga line I often talk about, like a the conga where people dance in a line. You've got people who are up the front of the line and people down the back of the line, a whole bunch of people in the middle. So it's up to the folks who are up the front of the line in terms of this change process to realize, okay, here's what we need, and then do what we can to support those people who are further back down the line from us and maybe don't have the insights, don't have the early opportunities to change and those sorts of things. How can we create systems to help them along through this same process as well?
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate the insight about following the path. That's a good reminder that, we don't need to try to control and think about exactly what we need to do to react to all this. It's like if you're staying in alignment with your path, that stuff sort of takes care of itself.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
Also, I mean, for me personally, as far as the kind of prepper thing, I don't resonate with the prepper in the traditional sense of the term like you're talking about, but I find myself as on my sort of journey of transition into a layer 6 sort of deal, have just found myself naturally attracted to things that you're talking about as far as just sort of a realization of, shit, I don't know much about the land around me. Like, what species of plants can I eat? What are the mushrooms I can eat? How do I hunt these animals around here? How would I set up a permaculture garden? Or, I just find myself naturally attracted to foraging and hunting and learning about the land and feeling more connected to some feeling of security within the environment and the community. Not like I'm dependent upon a pineapple coming from halfway around the world, for my lunch. Not that I don't love a pineapple, but you know what I mean? It's just sort of the realization of how fragile and disconnected everything is, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. We also need to look to new technologies as well. I mean, there's some great stuff coming through at the moment, like automated farming setups, and indoor farming, vertical farming, those sorts of things, which can allow us to grow things that might not normally grow in a particular environment,
Yeah.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is it's not about getting back to basics and making sort of furniture out of sticks. It's also about using our technology to the best ability, that we can, and building things which are going to help us along the way. I think another risk that we need to be aware of is the risk of increasing cosmic radiation and how that can impact both our well-being and also the technologies that we're using. There's a big sunspot facing Earth right at the moment, which if it had a big cough, it could wipe out our electrical systems for a while. So we need to take those things into account. And I believe that all the technologies we need to survive and thrive during the times ahead are probably already here right now. Some of them are probably being suppressed, but in good time, they'll become available as well.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Yeah, it's interesting what you say about farming, because it does, I mean, do you see there's a lot of ideas technology-wise that seem to be, so like carbon sucking machines, for example. There are people who are talking about using carbon sucking machines to pull carbon out of the atmosphere to help climate change. But then you find certain things like regenerative agriculture where these cover crops and these different principles can actually sequester carbon from the atmosphere into the soil. So it's almost like you're trying to create something that can already be done naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't question the fact that we've damaged our atmosphere with pollution. There's no doubt that we've done that, but I don't think carbon is the issue that a lot of people are saying it is. To be honest, if as the Grand Solar Minimum progresses, we're going to get an increase of low-level cloud cover on the planet, which is going to be one of the key cooling mechanisms. And we may well, if there was any sudden extremely effective activity to reduce global warming on the planet, it may actually work counter to our needs in the future. I guess that's what I'm trying to say as we go through this cool period that seems
Right.
to be approaching. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time here, but it's great talking to you. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty more stuff that I would love to talk to you about, but yeah. So, can people expect a new episode of Future Sense coming out anytime in the near future?
I've actually been thinking about maybe doing one on the globalists, which we sort of covered pretty well in this. So I might have a listen to this and see if whether I need to add anything to what I've said. But I'll certainly put this episode out through the Future Sense channel, probably in 2 parts, given the length of it, as I've done before when you and I have spoken. And I really appreciate this opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to be travelling over the next few weeks, as I mentioned, up to central Queensland to visit my Aboriginal relatives up there and do some plant medicine exploration. So it may well be that this is the only episode that comes out within the next 2 to 3 weeks, and I'll get something out after that, I expect, yeah. Can I
Very
also,
cool. Well,
just before I close, can I just give my cousin Rob McDonald a plug for this artwork in the background here?
yes.
Rob lives up on the Sunshine Coast here in Australia. He's an amazing artist. You can find him, Robert McDonald, artist. I'm sure if you just Google that on the web, you'll find his stuff. It all kind of looks very swirly and interdimensional and psychedelic like that. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, definitely. It's awesome stuff. If you do the globalist episode, I realized one sort of aspect of it that I am curious about that you don't need to answer right now, but just to put it into your mind, is this sort of like how does the Graves model give us confidence that we're not going to descend into some Hunger Games reality of global control and domination and sort of that sort of dystopian future? That's something that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
just
Thanks, Jacob.
just a
I'll
little
take that on
note there.
board.
And I think I know that I have peers that are wondering the same thing, that we talk about, like, yeah, we kind of feel like there's this positive sense that things are going to evolve to these higher layers and that there won't be this sort of dystopian reality, but there's this still some sort of background question of like, is that really what's going to happen, or are we just screwed,
Just very quickly, there are dystopian realities happening on this planet every day. Most of us don't get to see them because we live in comfortable places, but they're out there.
That's a great point.
So it's not like it's some weird thing that's going to pop up that we haven't experienced before. It's out there, and it's true that we need a certain amount of tension in order to drive the change. It's just a matter of how much tension we need, and whether we can consciously, choose the change. Yeah.
Yeah, where like what you said is a perfect example of there could be small, sustainable layer 6 and 7 communities, while simultaneously there is a dystopian reality existing in parallel with that.
Absolutely. It's a matter of, getting to the point where you have the capacity to choose which one you want to create. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again, Steve.
Thanks, Jacob. Great to talk to you, mate. Always.
Yeah, you too, man.
You've been listening to the Future Sense podcast, brought to you by the non-profit Agency for Advanced Development of Integrative Intelligence, part of the RD Mesh Foundation. You can find us online at futuresense.it, where you can subscribe for free, and also link to our social media accounts on Twitter and Facebook.